If you want to get the most out of your mental health and optimize your mind, then you have to watch this video. Today, we're going to be talking about ideas to improve your mental health and how the mental health space has transformed over the years. Also, if you haven't hit that like button, please be sure to do so. And I'd appreciate you subscribing to the channel if you're enjoying the videos. Hello and welcome to Health and Humanity with Dan Voss, a health podcast show centered around living healthier lifestyles and improving our human connection and relationships. I have with me today Smit Naik, and Smit is an expert in mental health, which is what we will be discussing today. Smit, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Of course. No, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate you giving me something to do in this quarantine madness.
Yeah, I think at this point now we're several weeks, even months into it, and
I don't even know what time is anymore, honestly.
Yeah, I know.
Yesterday, tomorrow, today, what's going on?
Right? Cool. Why don't you start off by telling our audience a little bit more about yourself, your background in mental health?
Sure. Yeah. So again, my name is Smit. I am from Chicago, Illinois. I appreciate you calling me a mental health expert. That is I think a title I'm not quite prepared for. I do think that I have a perspective on mental health, specifically digital mental health, the idea of mental health equity. I'm a relatively young entrepreneur in this world, but I've learned quite a bit. And I have, like I said, a perspective that I stand by pretty strongly as far as what mental health needs and where it can go.
Sure.
But I am excited to prove my stripes as a mental health expert, hopefully down the line. But in any case, my story is relatively simple. As I mentioned, I'm from Chicago. I have been within the mental health entrepreneurial ecosystem in the city for a while, serving both as the founder and CEO of a company, as well as an early stage employee of a few companies. Again, with the idea being, I think what I'm most interested in, to be short, is the idea of digital health implementation within a clinical framework. So how can we actually add technology to the point of care for people engaged in mental health care in a way that's both effective, that increases health equity and access, and then at the end of the day, has a business model attached to it, And so that's the world I kind of surround myself with. Currently, I'm in between positions looking at the next thing. But again, my goal is to really try to internalize what mental health is today as a paradigm and try to readjust it.
Sure.
I think in some sense it's on entrepreneurs like myself, yourself, and really just young, hungry people to tackle big problems. And I would never say that I'm the smartest at it, but I do feel like I have what I call mental health privilege, which is that my mental health is relatively stable, and I can't help but ask myself, what do I do with this privilege, if not to help those who might not have it?
Sure.
And that's kind of where I focus in the entrepreneurial ecosystem today.
Yeah, that's great. Why don't you touch a little bit more on the topic of mental health, especially in this country, in Western culture? Do you have any insight on where we were, let's just say 15 years ago, and where we are today? And I know you've talked about the need for a paradigm shift. What is it that we maybe have gotten right in terms of mental health in the last 5, 10, 15 years? And where are we kind of going the wrong direction, and you think we can maybe shift a little bit to help improve?
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, that's a very heavy question for sure. I would start by saying that, where we are with mental health today is amazing. It's the best it's ever been in the history of human health. I'm very excited by the tides turning, by the increased access to care, the way that we even talk about it, the fact that a podcast like yours exists and is interested, serves to show just how far we've come. I'm very excited for the future of it. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned, I am not a scientist. I'm not really at the forefront of its medical progress, but I am an entrepreneur. And so I feel very much the forefront of its business case.
Sure.
And the fact that a business case even exists means that we have created something, some ecosystem, some world where people are ready to invest in their own mental health. And I think that's incredible.
Sure.
So I'm very excited by it overall. That being said, obviously, we have a long way to go. At the end of the day, as I mentioned and as you alluded to, we do need a paradigm shift. Medical health or traditional medical health has come a long way, And it's very digestible to most people because you can see medical issues for the most part, right? So the idea of a broken bone or the idea of a tumor are things that are very essentially visual. So you can take it all in, you know what's wrong, and you know what better looks like. And the problem with mental health, as you can guess, is it's internal for the most part. And of course, there are symptoms that present themselves outwardly, but for the most part, a lot of people are suffering in silence and quietly, and it affects way more people than anyone can even guess with as good science as we have. It can be episodic in the same way that a cold can be episodic. And this is all to say that, at the end of the day, because as far as all the progress that we've made, there's still so much what I call white space in this world. The idea that what is depression? What is anxiety? We have these assessments to test for them. Are they the best assessments? Who should be giving the assessments? What do we do with those answers? What does it mean to get better when you have depression? What does it mean to live with anxiety versus curing your anxiety? These are all of these kind of nebulous, crazy questions that should be answered by people smarter than I am.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, I think can be assisted or enabled by technology and by, these things that we all carry with us all the time. And so that's kind of where I sit. The idea is that mental health has a long way to go from a medical standpoint, from an implementation standpoint, from a technology standpoint. And I'm a big fan of starting from zero. Now that we have all these new tools, let's not just stay committed to what we created 15 years ago when the iPhone was just being created. Let's take this opportunity to take a step back.
Right.
And look at the whole paradigm and the whole kind of experience from a patient's perspective, from a clinician's perspective, and redesign it. We have a head start. And so let's make that impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the idea of kind of starting fresh, we have, as you alluded to, we have learned so much over the decades with mental health. We've made really good strides. But as you said, there's a lot of room for improvement. What does that look like in terms of starting from zero? What are some practical steps? And I know that's a very loaded question. There's so many things that need to be done by so many different people, but let's just take, I don't know, why don't we just start with your individual, your average everyday individual that is interested in improving their mental health, but they don't know where to start. Or maybe they have bits and pieces of information. They're like, okay, meditation may work. Let's give that a try. Where can we even start, just like from ground zero?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you allude to something that's really interesting. The idea of meditation, Headspace being kind of where they are as a result, an awesome technology company. I think there are many things that we can do for ourselves. And I think part of, step one at the end of the day, and this is true about step one for anything these days, is going to Google and saying, how do I do X? And I think that was something I did myself when I was interested in my own mental health 10 years ago in college, when everything was terrible, but also exciting and weird. And I think in a lot of ways, there are resources out there. I think what we need is more people to be curious about their mental health and to wonder if it's as good as it could be or as good as it should be. And so in a lot of ways, I think a very powerful first step is to just be interested, be introspective, and take a second and think to yourself, how do I feel right now? Am I happy as I should be? What's out there for me? What are successful people doing? And again, just getting out there and trying to grab it. And if that ends up being something like meditation, give it a shot. There's a very kind of low risk way to do it now, thanks to technology. Like, give it a try. Think about the clinicians or the counselors with therapists who might be in your area that can help you. Whether there's something wrong with you or not. I think the first step really is just thinking about it.
Right.
Because the more you kind of, I guess, just acclimate or are able to articulate the options that you might have, the sooner you'll feel confident in discussing with other people and seeing what's out there, into noticing the commercials that are on TV that might be able to help you. And I think we should all be doing that. As opposed to what I think most people do, which is, just not think about it, or think that this is temporary, or think that this is all part of the human experience, which, to be fair, it is, but it doesn't necessarily need to be as bad as it is. And so, again, I'm a big fan of just the organic, Google it, get your little incognito window open if you need to, and type it in so no one knows, but do what you need to just to, figure out what's out there, and start wondering. I think that's the core first step. And from there's many things. The idea of, like I said, meditation, the idea of trying to find a clinician, the idea of wondering if medication is the right thing. There are people out there who can and want to help you. And I think at the end of the day, if you have the idea that you are interested in these sort of things, you'll find that these things pop up more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm excited about at the core of the progress we've made, for example, in the last 15 years, is the decreased stigma. Just the idea that people can think about these things.
Sure.
That's the hardest thing in all of health, is people taking care of themselves. It's the age-old medical question, and that's true in mental health as well.
Yeah. I want to talk about the idea of that decrease of stigma a little bit further, because I think that's the one area that, at least in America, that we have made a really good stride. Yeah. And there's still room for improvement there, no doubt. But I see a big shift in where, let's say 5-10 years ago, I don't want to put a marker on that year, but let's just say 10 years ago, people would look at mental health and it was something that was like, if you admitted that you needed some help, or you just wanted to work on your mental health, or you just wanted to improve some area of mental health, you were being vulnerable and you were admitting that there was something wrong with you. And that's not the case by any means. And I think we've made a really good stride to get past that. So what are you seeing there in terms of, for me, it's, I think, a mindset shift for people, that it's okay to look for help and to focus on mental health. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the most exciting thing about the last couple of decades has really been, and this is true in every industry vertical, I suppose, but the internet, right? The internet has brought a bunch of people together who at one time felt alone and now can find a community.
For sure.
And that's been used for the better and for the worse in many different ways.
Totally.
But certainly when it comes to mental health, it's an easy case to be made that it's been made better. The idea that people with depression can go online and can do things like find other people who are suffering from this, can find a therapist easier. The idea of incognito mode I mentioned earlier, I don't know why it keeps coming up in my mind, but that's something that's impactful in this case as well. How do you secretly look at something that you feel vulnerable about, or to communicate to people anonymously? So in a lot of ways, that's, in my opinion, the catalyst to where we're headed. And that's been the excitement about the stigma changing, right? Where people are just, there's memes about depression and anxiety, and there's humor being kind of found in the natural human experience. It's really exciting. And I think the natural kind of progression of that simply is that we are okay talking about it. Like, we all know what's going on. We all know that people feel different types of ways. And now we just have an opportunity to learn about it quickly and to kind of desensitize ourselves from all of that, like, medieval baggage about, oh, you're feeling sad for a while. Like, that stuff is over. Right. We're giving each other some space now, and doing it, I think, in a relatively safe way.
Yeah.
The internet is not the safest place in the world, but I do think that that's one thing that the credit needs to go where it's due.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just on a personal note, a personal example of getting past that stigma and being vulnerable. So for the last few months, I've actually been seeing a therapist, and for no, real serious reason. It's just, I think it's a good thing. I kind of relate it to working out. Like, you going to the gym or going for a run, like, that's to take care of your physical health. And by seeing a therapist, that's just one example, but by seeing a therapist, that's taking care of your mental health. You're focusing on improving your health.
Agreed.
So that's just a personal example of that stigma. And I've noticed too, I think if I can implore anybody that is nervous about this topic, especially if you are seeing a therapist and you don't want to talk about that, sure, that's personal. You don't have to tell other people. But for me personally, I've noticed just in everyday conversations, I'm starting to get more comfortable just sharing with different people. I'll just bring it up naturally. Like, oh yeah, yesterday I was talking to my therapist about this.
Yeah,
and I think by doing that, by getting more comfortable sharing that with other people, we can all kind of get around that. And then it's going to be no different than talking about how you were at the gym last night, or, something to that effect. So.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I think that's, I think the term, I've also been seeing like a maintenance therapist, right? Someone who's just there to talk to in a non-judgmental way, and to, present ideas about myself to, and be asked important questions, in a lot of ways. I agree. Everyone should be doing it. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, I do believe it's on people like yourself and myself who who are seeing therapists who understand the experience to talk about it, to make the space safer
Right.
for those who may have more severe conditions or who may have been thinking about it for a while but haven't been able to pull the trigger, whatever it might be. Again, mental health privilege is something I think about a lot. And I think the more we're talking about it and the more we're sharing, even the small instances of mental health kind of maintenance or therapy that we're all engaged in, the better it'll be. And that could be things like mindfulness. That could be things like I took a walk without my phone just because I needed that.
Yeah.
Again, mental health is half, if not more, of health as far as I'm concerned. And we should be talking about it all the time.
100%. You just touched on a few things that I personally wanted to get into here. You mentioned with different examples of what we can do to improve mental health. It can be, we've touched on meditation, but mindfulness. I've been enjoying a walk pretty much every day, just go out for a half hour or an hour. What other examples and practical steps do you think people can take? I like the idea of mindfulness because I personally believe we don't spend enough time just being alone.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that on a previous interview with somebody else, and they're like, well, actually, maybe before quarantine, because now we are some people are spending more time inside alone.
Sure.
But in general, I think a lot of people don't necessarily spend enough time to just sit and have quiet, right? Like just sit and just let your mind wander. So that would be another example. But do you have any other practical steps that people can kind of focus on?
Totally. I mean, I like what you're saying. The idea, my wife and I discuss this all the time as, like, let's let ourselves get bored, right? Like, just sit there. And I think, again, going back to the internet, right? There's all these distractions everywhere.
Yes.
It's very easy to find something to do or to convince yourself that you're doing something. But it's really difficult to just sit in yourself for a while, and to allow your thoughts to approach non-judgmentally and tackle problems, or let the problems just sit there themselves, to wonder and to dream and these sort of things. Things that we used to do all the time in high school, if you were me, instead of listening, but also things that just allow you to be okay with yourself, good and bad.
Yep.
And that's my favorite thing about mindfulness in general. And it's the idea, I mean, it's in the name, right? Just being aware of your mind and aware of what's going on around you. And it's something that excites me a lot about just the future of mental health. Like, that should be just a thing that we encourage kids to do, and adults. And it's literally the least you can do is give yourself the time to be yourself, you know? And as long as people can engage in it and learn, and the first time is the hardest, and it doesn't necessarily always stay. Actually, it stays hard for a while. But it's something that's so worth it. You know what I mean? Because once you start to really arrive at in a place where you can be mindful and really be introspective, you find that the benefits are they pay off in dividends. It's amazing. And so obviously that's one thing. Another thing I think is really just the idea of what we're doing now, which is just talking about it, saying it. Like, I don't know what the quote-unquote cure for depression is. I don't know if depression should be seen as an illness. There's a lot of high-level questions I don't know about.
Sure.
But I do think that being able to just talk to people, whoever they are, that can be a friend, that can be a spouse, that can be a therapist, whoever it is, just get in the habit of just saying, hey, look, how was my day?
Yeah.
Like, what am I feeling right now?
Right.
And I think in a lot of ways, articulating and actually saying out loud how you feel is half of the work. And so I'm a big proponent of that. Those things are easier said than done. I think there's a lot of ways. I think another issue that I hear a lot about from people who are engaged in therapy or have tried to engage in therapy is simply that they don't like their therapist, or there's a mismatch.
Sure.
Therapists it's an amazing industry full of really heartfelt, thoughtful people.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that sometimes they're just not a good fit.
Right.
And I think there is a component of that sort of mindset. Hey, listen, I'm going to meet with this person. They might not work out.
Right.
That doesn't say anything about therapy, about my mental health,
right,
about who I am as a person. What it says is I'm a different person than that person, and I'm going to find the next person and try that out. In the same way you would try on shoes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in so many ways that I would relate it to dating as well. Like, you can't just have this mindset of like, I'm not going to find love because the last date you went on with somebody, it just wasn't a good fit, right? It's the same thing with your therapist.
Yeah, exactly. It's very easy. I mean, mental health is hard enough on its own, and there's a lot of obstacles to getting better mental health.
Yeah.
But it's also really easy to be dissuaded from different things by having a bad experience. I tried this app and it sucked, so now I'm just done with all mental health apps. Like, it's a very common kind of response, and it's understandable entirely, but at the end of the day, I think there needs to be a little bit more, and again, going back to the fact that stigma goes down, more momentum behind your own mental health, like trying to stay away from being discouraged by bad experiences, by bad actors, or simply by the fact that you don't feel like you're getting better immediately.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know if that's totally an answer to your question.
Absolutely. No,
but
that's great.
Again, I think conversation is everything to me. And I would encourage everyone, if you have a safe space, someone to talk to, put it out there. Let's talk about it more.
I think right now that's more important. It's as important now than ever before, during the time of quarantine, for a number of reasons. If you are living with somebody else, spend this time that we have to talk, right? Just to have these conversations. Or on the other end of that spectrum, if unfortunately you are in a living situation where, whether it's a spouse or a roommate, where you're not on good talking terms, or if it's unfortunately abusive or whatever, and you can't talk to that person that you're living with, make sure you find somebody else to reach out to, a friend or a therapist or somebody to be able to talk about those issues.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And I'll speak, I think, to the other side of the coin for a minute. The people who are being talked to about this. I think we all want to be resources. We all want to be helpful. I mean, the best thing you can do for your own mental health, in some sense, is doing things like showing gratitude and helping the people you care about.
Sure.
And so I think the impetus is also on all of us to be open to these sort of things, to reach out to those we're concerned about, to give them the space to talk about it if they want to, when they're ready. And maybe not necessarily expect that everyone will be prepared for that conversation, but making sure that you are there for people. It's amazing the small things that we can do, a text message or a phone call, whatever it might be, to say, hey, I'm around, I'm bored, I can't play Zelda all day.
Right.
Like, let me know what's going on and let's figure it out.
For sure.
I think that's, again, the impetus is on both sides, being open to talking and being open to listening.
Yep.
And so, yeah.
That's great. That just reminded me, I have a friend that's been texting me once a week just to check in. And she's just like, hey, monthly or weekly check-in. How are things?
Yeah.
And I love
totally.
it. It's such a nice way to, it's almost like an outlet. Like, most people aren't going to just text or call somebody to vent. I mean, some people do, and you need that. But for me personally, like, I'm not going to just pick up the phone and text somebody and be like, oh, I'm having the worst week ever. Like, so for her to like reach out and just ask how I'm doing, now it almost gives me like permission to share what's on my mind.
Totally. Yes, I agree entirely. A question that I found myself asking a lot to folks also that I talk to on the phone, just to kind of disarm a little bit, is, how's your mental health? Or how's your emotional health? Just a weird kind of sciencey question that makes them take a step back and actually wonder what I mean.
For sure.
And I think those things can help, as opposed to maybe just, how you doing today? Or like, what's going on? And again, it's just opportunity for them to start thinking about it in those terms, which are the terms that they're going to hear about from their counselor and their, and the commercials with Michael Phelps, all these sort of things. So I'll also qualify by saying that I'm not a therapist. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I know that the industry and what mental health can be or should be is kind of this nebulous, weird world. But I just think that, again, from people like you and I who are on the younger side, who can appreciate the value of these sort of things, like we have to push the perspective, regardless of whether we're necessarily qualified to.
For sure. I kind of want to touch back on the topic you were mentioning before of the practice you and your wife sometimes just allow yourselves to be bored. Yeah. And I really love that example because I honestly can't remember the last time I was bored, even during quarantine. Like, I've found so many different things to fill up my time, whether it's this podcast or video games or all the TV shows that are on Netflix or scrolling through social media. I mean, there's just so many things that stimulate our minds. And in many ways it's overstimulation. So I really like that idea of just allowing yourself to get bored and then go from there, let your mind wander.
Totally. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? How we, like with Netflix and all these kind of streaming services, that you can convince yourself like, oh, I have so many shows to catch up on. Like, you'll even frame that in the way of there's work to be done.
Right.
And I need to like finish X, Y, and Z. And when you look at the language we use to describe those things, there's no relief there. That's not really relaxation. That's not really,
Yep.
A safe space for your mental health.
Sure.
As enjoyable and as awesome as all those things are, and they have a place, it's just amazing how we, project this idea of, fill up every slot in that calendar.
Right.
Because otherwise you're not doing it right.
Yeah. I'm smiling right now because a couple weeks ago, I got into the habit of, I've always been into some form of a to-do list just to make sure like I have the things I need to get done checked off. And I think it's just a good thing, like either the night before to make that list or the morning of.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably know more about it in terms of the science, but there is maybe it's a dopamine effect where when you cross those things out, you feel good.
Yeah.
But the reason why I was smiling here when you were talking about, we've categorized it as like something that needs to get done in terms of like Netflix shows. Yeah. I literally wrote on the to-do list a few weeks ago, Ozark. And it was part of my daily to-do task is to finish up Ozark.
For sure.
It was such a funny thing there.
Yeah. I love the idea of to-do lists in general.
Yeah.
I'm the same way where I need like there's to your point, like this dopamine serotonin effect that happens. I don't know the science in particular, but I will say like I'm a guy who will like make a to-do list for the day or for the week, and you start with the 5 things that you've already done.
Right. Just to cross them off.
Wake up in the morning.
Yep.
Make a to-do list. Done.
Feel accomplished. Yep.
These sort of things really get you kind of moving. I think the term I like most to describe these sort of things is hygiene, like mental health hygiene, which is a kind of strange term to use in this context.
Yeah,
but most people probably heard it as far as like sleep hygiene. What does that mean to like go to have a bedtime and turn the lights off in this way and to brush your teeth and wind down? The term hygiene can be used in so many different ways in terms of your mental health. And I think a lot about like, what am I doing for my hygiene? Yeah. I'm going to go take a shower, put on deodorant. What's the equivalent there that I can do here on the sheet of paper or in my own mind or whatever it might be to clean myself mentally? Where's that hygiene aspect?
For sure.
But yeah.
That's great. Another thing I kind of want to loop back to is you briefly mentioned that mental health makes up just part of our overall health, but it is a high percentage of what makes up our overall health. Obviously nutrition is another big piece, physical exercise, sleep. Are you able to touch on a little bit on how they are all connected? Because I do believe that exercising, you go out for a run, like that is going to improve your mental health. Like how are those all connected?
Yeah, it's a weird. So my first company that I started was called Actualized Therapy. And the reason I called it that was because of the self-actualization pyramid. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom, it starts with, things you absolutely need, food and water and shelter and oxygen and those sort of things. And at the top of that pyramid, there's a self-actualization principle, right? Where there is some part of the human condition that needs something deeper, needs something more, some sort of self-actualization.
Yeah.
And there are all these things that I think are represented on this hierarchy, whether that's your physical health, obviously near the bottom, but there's also things like, your exercise, your nutrition, the quality of what you're eating. I'm sure in some sense Netflix is out there somewhere.
Sure.
But the reason that that I got really interested in mental health and the idea of self-actualization is because I think mental health actually cuts across all of it. And the idea is that mental health kind of taints everything, or poor mental health, taints everything that you do in life. And whether that's going for exercise or whether that's the quality of the food you enjoy or the interactions you have with people, it's just an unfortunate truth that no matter what you want, or what you want to do or what you want out of life, it will be and can be hindered by your mental health status. Yeah. And so it's something I think about a lot. And don't get me wrong, I do think there is a feedback loop, right? So I'm with you on that. Like in this quarantine times, I've taken to doing a lot of walks. I will go walk 5 miles.
Yeah.
Occasionally 5 minutes, 5 miles out in the city and just think and like just become better. And not only is that good for my own mental health, it's also good for my physical health. And there is this feedback loop that's really virtuous and that's progressive. It makes me feel better in so many ways. And so some people will reduce it to, just go take a quick mile run and you'll feel better.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true.
Right.
I think there are a lot of healthy people who have mental health issues and there's a lot of unhealthy people who don't. But I do think that there is the core concept is that the nucleus of who you are is your mental health.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, you need all of it, of course, to achieve self-actualization.
Yep.
But start with, who am I? What do I need to be
Right.
happy? And then how does the rest, all the variables and all the things in my life that I can adjust, how can I adjust them to fit my betterment?
It's so true. It's so true. I always look at health overall as being that first foundational step. Like if you don't
Yeah.
have your health, just in general, if you don't have your health, you can have all of the money in the world, but if you're bedridden, you're not able to enjoy that money. Or if you're really successful at business, like you can have great successful businesses, but if you're not healthy, you're not able to really function in those businesses.
Yeah.
Or your relationships, if you don't have your health and you're bedridden is the example I use, you can't go out and enjoy your family and your relationships with your kids or your spouse, right? That health is that core foundational piece. And I find it interesting that mental health is the core piece of your overall health. And it makes sense. It all adds up.
Yeah. And again, I don't mean to be prescriptive about this. I think this is just my perspective.
Sure.
And it's really interesting to me.
Yep.
Just the way that, I'm like a business person, and I think I've been fortunate to work alongside hyper successful, wealthy, like very like passionate people.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter where you are in life, no matter what your station is, the idea of mental health cuts across them all. And you can be this amazingly successful person that everyone wants to be,
Right.
and feel poor about it, and feel like you're suffering.
Sure.
And that suffering is important and needs to be addressed no matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter, again, if you're on the other side of that spectrum and maybe you come from a relatively low income background and you don't have a lot in your mind, your depression or your anxiety or your whatever you're going through is valuable. And it doesn't matter who you are, mental health will be there. And so I love that idea of how important mental health is.
Yeah.
And what I feel most passionate about is just getting to a place where, we don't need a cure for everything. There's bad mental health that I think is valuable. Like heartbreak mental health, I think is a beautiful thing. I used to be an emo kid in high school, and like I grew from that.
Yeah.
That's not really what I mean when I think about mental health. I mean, as important as it is, I also think from my own perspective, the idea of just getting people up to baseline.
Yep.
What are the unfair things? What does the predisposition to bad mental health mean for you? How can we get rid of that? How can we get rid of, a 27-year-old who gets diagnosed with bipolar or schizophrenia in this kind of just totally unfair way? These are the things that really concern me, but they're all valuable. Don't get me wrong. Again, I'm an emo kid. Look at my hat, right? So like all these things kind of fit into one kind of giant story about mental health.
Yeah, 100%. What are your thoughts on just taking smaller steps to improve your overall mental health? And I think for most of our listeners, like it's a bit of a relief to realize like, yeah, I can just start small. I don't have to tackle this whole like complex topic of mental health. I don't need to become this Zen-like person overnight that just like kind of nails down everything with mental health. If I can just make small incremental steps, I'll come out on top at the end of the day.
Sure.
What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. It reminds me of a clinical director at my old company, a really good friend of mine named Russell Dubois. He's a PhD in clinical psych. He has this amazing perspective about what it means to cure mental health or to feel better from poor mental health versus living with it, right? And the idea that there are, in the same way you have to learn to live, for example, with your height or, your eye color or these things that are just given to you, it's okay to also live with poor mental health, and reframe what that actually means. So he gives this awesome analogy of, a person with anxiety. And, the way to imagine it is there's anxiety on one side of a giant hole, and then you're on the other side of that hole, and you're playing tug of war. And you're fighting your anxiety over and over again, trying to overcome it and beat it so it goes away and falls down that hole. And you keep doing it and you keep doing it, and you're convinced that if you try hard enough, your anxiety will go away. But as Russell would say, what does it mean to just drop the rope and to allow your anxiety to exist and figure out how to coexist with it in the same way you coexist with who you are in other ways? And that's an idea that really excites me because it doesn't put pressure on you. You don't have to, there's no, in this world of Instagram and Facebook and comparing yourself, there is no one who's figured it out. Everyone's wrestling with the same things. And so it's easy to convince yourself, well, they overcame their anxiety and their depression, or they never had it, and I'm just unlucky. But all that stuff is just baggage that you don't deserve. Just let's figure out together a way to just admit that maybe maybe you do have anxiety. I'll admit I have anxiety, and I have depression episodic every now and again. But I'm interested in dropping the rope. I'm not interested in being necessarily like focusing on I want to be cured, and I want to just never be depressed again, or never have anxiety again. No, this is who I am, and I'm cool with it. And I'm ready to drop the rope and figure out a world where I can coexist with it.
100%.
And set up, structures around me and habits and paradigms in my own world that help me live with it or occasionally around it when I need to. And that stuff gets me excited.
For sure. I just had a guest on the show. Her name's Jennifer Loudon. She just wrote a book called Why Bother? Basically talking about when you're in periods of either your life or even certain parts of the day where you have that thought of why bother, like why get out of bed or why start this business or whatever it is that you're having doubt, to push through that. So that was the premise of her book. And she talked about something that was really interesting. She said, it's okay to, when you have negative thoughts or you have feelings of anxiety or depression or whatever that may be, just to face it head on and just acknowledge it. So the example she used was kind of like how if your neighbor knocks on the door and you answer the door, for you to do the same, just internally, just say, oh, hi, like you're here, like this
right on time, of course.
Yeah, right on time again. Yeah. Just acknowledge that whatever that is, that feeling of anxiety, depression, negative thoughts, any kind of adversity throughout your day, just to acknowledge that it's there. Yeah. And then you can kind of move through it and not have to wrestle with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, again, I'm saying this as an amateur and I'm not a clinician, but I do think a lot about, the human condition and, what's worth fighting and what's not worth fighting, and I think things that are worth fighting are very clear. But there's a whole level of just the rest of us just trying to exist and make it and be happy with the cards that we're dealt, and there is no miracle cure from on high that's going to come down and fix us. So let's just be friends and hang out and talk about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then be okay with who we are and, the cards that we were dealt. But again, it's easier said than done. And I think I'm excited to be on the forefront, or at least as part of the movement and the wave of getting us there. We have a long way to go. Yeah. But I do feel like that's where I want the world to be.
That's great. That's awesome. Very good. Before I get to my last question for you, is there anywhere that you'd like to send people if they're interested in connecting with you and learning more?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose not particularly at the moment. So I'm kind of a boring guy. I could use some help with Zelda. So anyone who's out there, reach out to me. But only to say, look me up on LinkedIn and let me know. I mean, I'd love to connect with anybody who's interested in the space, who's a visionary and a little bit of a delusionary and has a perspective that they care about in mental health.
For sure. That's great. Awesome. And if you're okay with it, I can also link up your LinkedIn profile for anybody to check out your work and potentially connect with you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So last question I have here is, who do you want to impact the most with your work?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. So this is going to be a strange answer because the right answer is, everyone, the whole world. Sure. Right? But the truth is, there's a story I remember hearing a while back about, a group of freshmen in college that all come together. They're all pre-med. They want to go out and go to med school and save the world. And the professor says to the class, hey, I know you guys all have these lofty goals and dreams about what you want from the world. And everyone here will probably tell themselves, I just want to save one person and I'll consider my work worthwhile. And then he says right after that, I just want you guys all to know that it's okay if that person is you. And it's something I think about a lot. Why am I so interested in this? Who do I really want to affect and change? I think it's okay if that person is me. I want to do something that's meaningful. The work I do enhances my own mental health, and I feel fortunate to have it. And so from my perspective, when I'm not doing something that is impactful or meaningful or is increasing health equity in this country or the world, then my mental health suffers. And my goal is to just save myself by doing the right thing, showing gratitude when I can, and doing something that makes an impact. I guess like we all want to.
Sure.
And then in the meantime, if I could also beat Zelda, that'd be great. I mean, that's a big one.
I love that. I absolutely love that answer. In many ways, it reminds me of what I'm doing here with my podcast. So for me personally, like, of course, I want to impact the world, right? I want to impact everybody. But if I can at least impact a few people with improving their health, that's the goal for me and the dream. But
Totally.
It's so interesting that you say that, if that one person that you are trying to impact, if it's yourself, that's okay. Because for me, as I produce this podcast and I have different guests and do all these different interviews, I'm learning probably more than anybody, right? Like I admitted to you before this show that I'm not an expert in health. Like I'm just here to have people on to talk about their areas of expertise. And I'm learning so much, not just about health, but just about human relationships and bettering our lives and just living fuller lives. So
definitely
super relatable.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said before, I admire kind of what you're doing and
Thank
the
you.
idea that we're opening these conversations.
Yeah.
If we all save ourselves, then I guess that's one way to save the world. Right?
That's right. Right. That's awesome. No, I appreciate that. Well, this has been great, Smit. I really appreciate your time and you sharing your story and everything that you have going on. It's really been a pleasure.
Yes, definitely. I hope you're well, and looking forward to connecting again.
Thanks, buddy. You too. Have a great day.
Take care.
See ya.